My name is Hannah Brooks. I'm 31 years old, and this is the story of how the man I loved for 6 years left me because my job didn't fit his social brand, then came crawling back when I became the only thing that could salvage his public image. But I didn't just say no. I made sure he regretted ever thinking I was dispensable. If you've ever been told you're not enough, if someone's ever made you feel like your passion wasn't polished enough, or your dreams weren't shiny enough, this one's for you. Hit that subscribe button, like this video, and drop a comment if you've ever been underestimated. Because today, I'm walking you through how I turned betrayal into power. And trust me, you'll want to stay for the ending. I grew up on the outskirts of Charleston, South Carolina. My mom died when I was 13. And my dad, an old-school mechanic with grease on his hands and wisdom in his bones, raised me and my younger sister, Maddie. He taught me 2 things. Don't lie about who you are, and respect the people who fix things you depend on. That stuck. While other girls in my high school dreamed of becoming influencers, I spent weekends learning how to weld and reading marine engineering manuals. Not because I wasn't good at other things, I graduated with honors in math, but because I loved creating things with my hands. I loved structure, reliability, truth. After college, I got a job as a field engineer specializing in structural assessments for offshore facilities. Dirty boots, safety vests, oil under my nails. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real, tangible. I made things work that otherwise would have sunk. And then came Logan Foster. We met at a local entrepreneur summit I was only at because my company needed to show face. Logan was polished. He wore loafers with no socks, pitched branding like it was philosophy, and quoted startup books like scripture. He worked in digital marketing for a mid-tier cosmetics company back then, pushing vegan lipstick and skincare with glitter. He had the kind of smile that made you lower your guard, and the type of words that made you feel like you could do more. Be more. I didn't realize at the time that what he meant was, be more like me. Still, I fell, hard, and for a while, it worked. Logan didn't understand my world, but he liked saying he dated someone authentic. I didn't understand his, but I enjoyed how confidently he walked through rooms. He introduced me to rooftop wine tastings. I took him shrimping with my uncle. He joked about how opposites attract. And in the beginning, it felt like we really did. We moved in together 2 years in. He proposed after 5. A simple silver ring. Just the way I liked. No audience. No Instagram post. For a moment, I thought I'd found something solid, someone who saw me, even when I wasn't shiny. But slowly, things began to shift. Logan's career took off. His company merged with a European brand, and he was promoted to head of communications. Suddenly, his circles changed. His world became founders, visibility strategy, and personal branding. Everything was a campaign, even us. He started correcting the way I introduced myself at networking events. Say marine engineer, he'd whisper, not welder. It sounds more elevated. I remember standing in the mirror, wearing the only tailored dress I owned, practicing how to say marine engineer like it didn't make my stomach churn, like I wasn't lying. Our fights became quieter, but sharper, like paper cuts. He'd say things like, "Can we skip your cousin's BBQ? I can't network there." Or, "Maybe don't post that photo in the jumpsuit. It doesn't align with what we're building." We were building an image now. The cracks widened when I decided to enroll in an advanced offshore welding and deep-sea repair certification program. It was a 6-month intensive course, half of it underwater. Quite literally, physically brutal, mentally demanding. But it was my dream. Not some fancy dream big slogan. A real, gritty, saltwater-drenched dream. Logan was less than thrilled. "I just don't see how this aligns with where you're headed," he said one night. spooning overpriced oat milk into a smoothie while I sat at the kitchen table, cataloging equipment specs. "You mean where you're headed," I replied. He didn't argue. Instead, he began to slowly phase himself out. Fewer check-ins, late nights at branding dinners, a strange obsession with couples like the Millers, an Instagram-famous pair where she ran a crystal healing startup, and he posed in beige trench coats. "Look how they lift each other," Logan would say, phone in hand. I said nothing, but inside, something snapped. One night, 3 months before our wedding, Logan came home, sat on the edge of our bed, and told me flatly, without even the pretense of pain, that we needed to pause the engagement. "It's not you," he said. "It's just, we're not compatible in where we want to go. You're very rooted." Rooted, like a weed, I suppose. I handed him the ring without a word. I didn't cry, not until much later. But in that moment, all I could think was, I may be rooted, but at least I know who I am. What he didn't know, what I didn't even fully know yet, was that the very things he dismissed as low brand value would become the pillars I stood on when everything fell apart. Because a storm was coming, and I was about to find out just how deep my roots went. And Logan, he was about to find out what happens when you underestimate a woman who builds her life with her own hands. The day Logan walked out with his loafers clicking neatly against the hardwood floor, he took with him more than the ring. He took the air out of the room. For days, I moved through my apartment like I was underwater, slow, muted, unmoored. I didn't sob or fall into a heap of cliches. That wasn't me. But grief has its own quiet weapons. The silence after betrayal echoes in a way that fills every corner of your mind, until even your coffee tastes like rejection. I threw myself into training, not in a symbolic, dramatic way. Literally. The offshore welding and deep-sea repair program I had enrolled in required me to be underwater 6 hours a day, operating heavy equipment, navigating blind corners in zero-visibility environments. We learned how to weld in currents strong enough to tear steel. The work demanded complete focus. One slip, and you could lose a finger. Or worse, it was perfect. For the first time in months. The noise in my head faded under pressure, underwater pressure. I was the only woman in a group of 16. And most of them assumed I wouldn't last 2 weeks. That made me want it more. My instructor, Caldwell, a retired Navy diver with a voice like gravel, never praised anyone, but after one particularly brutal day where my oxygen levels nearly dropped mid-weld and I still finished the patch, he simply said, "You've got spine, Brooks." It was the closest thing to affection he ever gave, and it meant more than Logan's entire proposal. Meanwhile, Logan's face still showed up on my feed from time to time, smiling at launches. Pitching his new personal rebranding workshop. He started a podcast. Of course he did. One episode was titled, "Curating Partnerships That Elevate You." I didn't listen. I didn't need to. The image alone was enough. Logan in a linen suit, holding a mic like a TED Talk messiah. I kept my head down, finished my certification, and landed a contract with a marine infrastructure firm that specialized in bridge repair and offshore facility restoration. It was physically demanding work, and I loved it. There was nothing abstract or curated about it. Either you reinforced the foundation, or the damn thing collapsed. No filters, just facts. But life, as always, had other plans. It started with headaches. Small ones at first, dull throb behind the eyes after long dives. I assumed it was dehydration. Then came the blurred vision, the dropped wrench, the day I forgot my own locker code. My supervisor pulled me aside after I tripped during a briefing. "You need to get checked out," he said gently. I shrugged it off. Probably just stress. I wasn't ready to hear anything else. But the next morning, I collapsed in the shower, My sister Maddie was staying over that weekend, thank God. She found me, disoriented, clutching my head, whispering someone else's name. At the hospital, they ran tests. The neurologist spoke softly, as if volume might worsen the diagnosis. You have a benign tumor pressing against your optic nerve. It's operable, but it needs to happen soon. I remember staring at the MRI scans, all grayscale and foreign, and thinking, so this is what it means when life hits reset. I didn't tell anyone else. Not my coworkers, not old friends. I asked Maddie to keep it quiet. I didn't want sympathy. I didn't want my name whispered in well-meaning pity. Most of all, I didn't want him to know. Logan had once said in passing during a conversation about relationships and legacy that no one wants to be burdened with someone who's broken. He probably didn't even remember saying it, but I did. It lodged itself in my chest like a shard of rusted metal. I spent the next few weeks prepping for surgery like it was another offshore assignment. I researched techniques, made notes, even color-coded my medication schedule. I didn't cry, not once, but some nights. I'd wake up and touch the back of my head, wondering what part of me they'd carve through, wondering if I'd wake up the same. One evening, just 3 days before the operation, I sat by the hospital window with a blanket wrapped around me, watching the rain stain the glass like someone trying to scrub away bad choices. That's when he walked in, Logan, in a cashmere coat, holding a latte from the most overpriced coffee shop downtown. He didn't look nervous. He looked rehearsed, like he had planned this entrance in his head and couldn't wait to deliver his lines. "Hey," he said, too casually. "Heard you were here. I wanted to check in." My mouth went dry. Maddie must have told someone, or maybe he found out another way. It didn't matter. What mattered was that he was standing here, uninvited, holding a latte like it could erase everything. Why, I asked, voice low. He sat in the visitor chair without asking. "Look, I know things between us didn't end clean, but I've been doing a lot of reflecting lately." Of course he had. "I'm launching a new campaign," he continued, "focused on resilience, overcoming obstacles, real stories." I blinked slowly. "And what does that have to do with me?" He leaned forward slightly, like a man pitching $1 million idea. "Your story's powerful. Hannah, your blue-collar grit meets modern perseverance. And this diagnosis, it's tragic, but inspiring. If you're open to it, I'd love to collaborate, maybe even do a profile piece. Could really help both of us." He smiled. Help both of us. That's when it clicked. He wasn't here for me. He was here for the optics, for the soundbite, for the redemption arc that featured him as the compassionate ex who still showed up. He saw my pain as a brand pivot. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the latte. I just stared at him, absorbing every word, every micro-expression. And something ancient and powerful stirred inside me. Not rage, not even hurt. Purpose. Logan had spent years curating his image, manipulating narratives, trimming facts to fit aesthetics. And now, he thought I was just another element to arrange in his gallery of triumph. He didn't know it yet, but he had just handed me the one thing more potent than betrayal. A reason. The operation was in 72 hours, but the reckoning had already begun. I didn't sleep the night after Logan showed up, not because I was afraid, but because every corner of my brain was sketching possibilities. There was something surreal about watching the man who once told me I wasn't strategic enough now try to commodify my pain for a rebrand. Something in me refused to let that sit quietly. He wanted a redemption arc. What he didn't realize was I had one of my own, and mine didn't end with forgiveness. Surgery was scheduled for Friday. By Wednesday night, I had already laid the groundwork. It started with a single text to Jordan. my best friend and former roommate back in college. Jordan wasn't just a barista with excellent intuition. He was plugged into the local PR and media scene, like a backstage pass to all things ugly and glamorous. He'd met Logan a handful of times at events and always referred to him as the linen leech. I told Jordan what happened. He didn't even blink before saying, "Let me do some digging." By the next morning, he sent me a screenshot Logan had already reached out to a popular lifestyle magazine, pitching a raw, intimate look at resilience featuring an unnamed ex who was bravely facing a major health challenge. The draft article was already titled, "Love, Loss, and Loyalty When Your Ex Becomes Your Compass." I nearly threw up. Not only had he moved forward without my consent, he'd already begun weaponizing my illness. This wasn't a man grasping at straws. This was a man with a plan. He was building a stage, and I was his unwilling co-star. That's when the blueprint formed. Not revenge for the sake of drama. Justice, on my terms. I'd spent my whole life being underestimated, too rugged, too grounded, too not enough for glossy circles. But my strength wasn't just in metal or machinery. It was in precision, timing, pressure. I knew how to fix things, and I knew how to dismantle them. Maddie, my sister, became the second player on the board, fiercely loyal and not one to play nice. Maddie had zero patience for manipulation. When I told her what Logan was planning, she simply said, "So we hit back where it hurts his brand." We devised the structure like an engineering schematic, each part serving a purpose. Step 1. Control the narrative. Jordan helped me draft a short video raw, unscripted, sitting in a chair by the hospital window. No makeup, no lighting tricks, just me, my voice, and one message. I didn't ask for a tumor. I didn't ask to be a storyline. I'm not a brand. I'm a human being who was once told I wasn't worthy because my job didn't fit a social feed. And now, someone wants to turn my recovery into a PR campaign. I will not be used. Jordan posted it from his account. Within 2 hours, it had over 80,000 views. By that evening, it was trending on TikTok under #NotYourInspiration. Step 2. Expose his pattern, Maddie. With her curious instinct and mild obsession with digital forensics, went through old group chats, shared Google Docs, and emails. She uncovered a trail Logan had reused ex-girlfriend's stories for branding plays before. A former girlfriend's mental health journey turned into a keynote speech. Another's family tragedy featured in a mini documentary that conveniently spotlighted Logan as the supportive partner. We reached out to those women. 2 responded. Both were livid. Both agreed to speak. Jordan arranged interviews under aliases for a podcast called The Unseen Image. The episode title, He Branded My Breakdown. Step 3. Let him speak first, then strike. I knew Logan's arrogance wouldn't let him stay quiet. And right on cue, he announced a live stream on his page, opening up about compassion, loss, and the road to healing. It was set for Saturday night. My surgery was Friday morning. The doctors told me not to stress, but I smiled to myself, knowing by the time he went live, the internet would already know what kind of man was behind the mic. The operation went smoothly. The tumor was removed with minimal complications. I woke up groggy, but clear-headed. The pain dulled by morphine and vindication. Jordan and Maddie were waiting with flowers and a laptop. "You're going to want to see this," Jordan said. On screen was Logan's live stream. He sat in front of a white backdrop, soft lighting, tea in hand, looking solemn. The comments were brutal. They rolled in faster than he could blink. "Did you ask for her permission? Not your inspiration. You built your brand on her breakdown. You're not a partner. You're a parasite." His face cracked. His voice faltered. He ended the stream early. But it wasn't over. Because step 4 was already in motion. We compiled everything: screenshots, audio clips, timelines, and sent it to the very media outlet he'd pitched to. The editor replied personally, "Thank you for the heads up. We're pulling the piece. We don't support manipulation for narrative gain." One less platform for him to hijack. Step 5. Reclaim the space. 2 weeks post-op. Once I could stand without holding on to walls. I recorded a follow-up video. This time, I was wearing my full welding gear. In front of the ocean, I looked straight into the lens and said, "I fix things. That's what I do. And sometimes, what needs fixing isn't just steel or concrete. It's the story you've been told about who's worthy." I was never the broken one. That video hit 1 million views in 3 days. Sponsorship offers came in, speaking requests, mentorship invites from programs for women in trades. For the first time, the world saw the full arc, not the tragedy Logan tried to exploit, but the tenacity he failed to see. But I wasn't done. There was one final step, the twist. Because I knew Logan wasn't the type to slink away. He'd wait, let things cool, then reemerge, rebranded again, maybe even as the man who learned from his mistakes. So, step 6 was personal. Jordan reached out to a mutual contact at a national leadership conference Logan had spoken at annually. We sent them everything quietly, professionally. Their reply: Logan's invitation had been rescinded. They would no longer support someone who blurred the lines between storytelling and exploitation. It wasn't loud. It wasn't public. But it was permanent. And that was what mattered most. The scaffolding of his brand had finally collapsed. And now, for the first time, I was standing on solid ground, not beneath him, not beside him, but far, far ahead. In the weeks that followed Logan's collapse, something strange happened. The world kept spinning, but for the first time, it spun on my terms. The noise faded, the storm died down, and I was left not in the ruins, but in the clearing. It was quiet, but it wasn't empty. The public takedown had done its work. The podcast episode featuring the other women he'd manipulated went viral, listened to, clipped, shared, quoted, overnight. Logan's name became shorthand for performative empathy. Not just a man who failed privately, but one who exploited suffering to boost personal capital. He became a cautionary tale. But here's what people don't tell you about reclaiming your power. It doesn't come with confetti. There's no parade, no glittering montage. You wake up the next morning and still have to take your medication. You still feel the tender spot on the back of your head where the surgeon made the incision. Your body still aches. And the people around you still move on with their lives. Maddie went back to her grad school applications. Jordan returned to his cafe. I was left to rebuild not just my health, but something deeper, my sense of self. And that wasn't easy. For a while, I struggled with purpose. I wasn't a victim anymore. I wasn't someone preparing for battle either. I was just Hannah, alive, healing, and unsure of what came next. Then came the email. Subject: keynote speaker invitation, Women in Trade Summit. I blinked, read it again. They'd seen my video. They wanted me to headline the annual summit in Chicago, a gathering of thousands of women in engineering, construction, marine operations, and other male-dominated industries. They called my story a rallying point. They wanted me to speak on resilience, dignity, and ethical storytelling in the workplace. I reread the email a dozen times before responding. My hands trembled not out of fear, but something more complicated. Because now, people wanted my voice, not filtered through someone else's platform, not curated, raw, me. I said yes. In the weeks that followed, I prepared with the same obsessive precision I brought to every welding job. I structured the talk like a dive plan entry: depth, pressure tolerance, assent. I practiced it in front of Maddie and Jordan until I could say it in my sleep. But deep down, I wasn't sure if I was ready to be seen. Not viral, not briefly admired. Seen, as in no longer hiding behind steel and salt water and sarcasm. It was easier, in some ways, to be in survival mode. You don't have to reflect when you're fighting, but stepping on that stage meant standing still, letting the world look at me as a whole, not just the girl who got dumped, not the patient, not the revenge architect, all of me. The night before the summit, I barely slept. I watched my reflection in the hotel bathroom mirror and whispered, "You're not here by accident." It was something my dad used to say when I'd doubt myself before a test or a big assignment. I repeated it until my chest stopped shaking. The ballroom was massive glass chandeliers, a sea of faces, cameras blinking like nervous eyes. The organizer walked me backstage and said gently, "Whenever you're ready." I walked out, and for the first 5 seconds, all I could hear was my own breathing. Then I spoke. I told them the truth. About growing up being called too mechanical for a girl. About falling in love with a man who slowly chipped away at my confidence, masked by charm and ambition. About being left, not because I failed, but because I refused to shrink to fit someone else's story. And about reclaiming the narrative, not just for myself, but for every woman who's ever been told she was too rough, too practical, not palatable enough. I ended with this: I don't fix ships anymore. I fix what people said couldn't be restored: dignity, voice, identity. I'm not here because I got lucky. I'm here because I stopped waiting to be chosen. The room stood, cheering, applauding. Some were crying, and I, woman who once doubted her own voice, was absolutely still. That night, back in the hotel room, I lay in bed fully dressed, staring at the ceiling, trying to process what had just happened. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt grounded, like something inside me had settled into place. But stories don't just end because the room claps. 3 days after the summit, I received a message from him. "Logan." He kept it short. "I watched your speech. I deserve everything that's happened. But I want you to know it made me reflect. I hope someday we can talk. No camera, no campaign, just talk." I stared at it, not with anger, not even disgust. Just curiosity. Had he really changed? I didn't respond, not because I hated him, but because I no longer needed closure from the same place the wound came from. His voice had no hold over mine anymore. I shut the laptop. The next day, I met with a nonprofit that supported young women entering skilled trades. I agreed to mentor a group of high school seniors girls who were more familiar with Instagram filters than welding masks. But their eyes lit up when I told them my story. Not the edited version, the full one. One of them, a girl with deep-set eyes and a notebook full of sketches, raised her hand and asked, "Do you ever wish he hadn't left? That none of it happened?" I paused. "No," I said, "because if he hadn't, I might still be trying to be someone I'm not. And honestly, I like this version of me a whole lot better." The girls nodded, scribbling notes. But I wasn't talking to them anymore. I was talking to myself. Because it's one thing to be pulled apart. It's another thing to rebuild. And when you rebuild yourself piece by piece, weld by weld, no one gets to question your worth again. Victory doesn't always sound like trumpets. Sometimes it sounds like your own steady breath, echoing in the early morning before the world wakes up. That was how I knew I'd won, not because Logan apologized, or because people cheered, but because I could finally sit in silence and feel whole. Not waiting, not recovering, not bracing for the next hit. Just whole. 3 months after the summit, My life had reshaped itself not dramatically, not overnight, but in layers, like steel cooling after fire. I wasn't chasing virality or applause. I just wanted to live with truth at the center. And quietly, it came. My mornings began with welding classes I now taught at a small but growing vocational program for girls aged 16 to 20. The program was originally a side initiative under a larger construction firm, but after the summit, it exploded in popularity. Donations came in. Tool companies offered free gear. A scholarship was named after my mother, the Brooks Foundation for Women in Technical Trades, because I mentioned her briefly in the speech, and someone out there remembered. Some days, the students would pull me aside, sharing stories of being told you're too clumsy, or girls don't belong on construction sites, or why don't you just go into beauty school? Every story, every hurt they revealed, was a brick in the home we were quietly building together. But even as the world turned brighter, healing wasn't linear. There were days when I'd catch a headline about Logan rebranded now as a digital minimalist, attempting to rebuild through slow, quiet outreach, no more selfies, no interviews, just silence. I heard rumors that he moved to Seattle, started volunteering anonymously at a support group for media burnout survivors. Part of me wondered if the shame had finally cracked him open in a way the applause never could. But I didn't investigate. I'd built a life with boundaries. My victories didn't need to touch his name anymore. Still, life has a way of folding in on itself in strange, poetic loops. One afternoon, after a long mentoring session, I walked into a bookstore downtown, the kind with more wood than light, where the smell of paper lingers longer than people do. I wandered into the nonfiction section and saw a book displayed Authentic Silence, What Happens When You Stop Selling Your Life, by L.F. I didn't pick it up. I didn't need to. The initials were enough. So was the title. Instead, I bought a small leather notebook, blank, clean, unbranded. I didn't know what I was going to write yet, but I knew it was going to be mine. The next morning, I opened to the first page and wrote, "You do not need to be chosen to be worthy. You do not need a spotlight to be whole." And that became my new compass. Over time, other doors opened. I was invited to consult on a documentary about women in industrial trades. I helped design safety gear for petite frames, something no one in the male-dominated market had bothered with. And I launched a podcast with Jordan and Maddie called Heat and Pressure, where we interviewed women who rebuilt their lives not with revenge, but with clarity. We didn't aim to be viral. We aimed to be real. Sometimes, strangers sent letters. One woman wrote, "I'm a nurse. I stayed in a toxic marriage because I was afraid I wouldn't be seen as successful alone. Your story gave me the courage to leave. I just got my own apartment. It's small, but it's mine." Another said, "I'm an immigrant working as a janitor while studying engineering at night. Everyone thinks I'm wasting time. Your words reminded me that grit is worth more than gloss." Each message was a spark, proof that the echo of truth travels farther than we think, even in a world addicted to illusion. But it wasn't until a year later that I faced the final test. I was invited to speak again this time, not to a conference, but to a boardroom. A private investment firm wanted to fund a national initiative supporting women in blue-collar industries, and they wanted me to help shape the program. I walked into the room wearing my boots, jeans, and a pressed work shirt, nothing flashy, no stylist, just me. As I introduced myself, a man sitting at the end of the table raised his hand. "I recognize you," he said. "You were the one who stood up against that PR scandal, right? That ex-boyfriend situation." I smiled, not politely, not defensively, calm, steel-forged. "Yes," I said, "but that's not what defines me. What defines me is what I built after." And the room fell silent, not out of discomfort, but recognition. Because we all carry pieces of past pain, but we choose whether to lead with it or to weld it into something stronger. When I left that meeting, I didn't feel powerful in the traditional sense. I didn't feel like a warrior or a victor or a heroine. I just felt clean, free, like the chapter had finally closed, not because someone else wrote the ending, but because I did. And here's the truth I've learned in every molten, messy, magnificent step since. There are people in this world who will only see your value when it benefits them, who will reduce your complexity to sound bites, who will disappear when you stop serving their narrative. Let them. Because the people who matter will find you after. When the dust has settled, when you've rebuilt, when you're standing on your own, not needing applause, just air, peace, and a place to breathe. Logan never spoke publicly again. I never answered his message. Some endings don't need closure, they just need distance. Today, I no longer define myself by what I survived, but by what I created in the aftermath.
And I'll leave you with this.
If someone ever tells you you're too much, too plain, too low value, or not enough for their story, don't argue. Just leave. And write your own, because no one gets to narrate your worth but you. Story 2. My name is Emily Saunders. I'm 29 years old, and I bought my dream house with my own 2 hands, only to find out my family never saw it as mine to begin with. They saw it as theirs. And it all began the day I opened my front door to find my cousin Brandon standing there with his girlfriend Crystal, a suitcase in one hand and a $1,000 stroller box in the other, even though they didn't have a baby yet. But to understand how I got to the point of nearly losing everything I'd worked for, you need to understand how I was raised. I grew up in a house where sacrifice was expected, especially from me. I was the oldest daughter in a working-class Arizona family where money was tight and dreams were rationed like food stamps. My parents didn't believe in indulgence. They believed in surviving, and they expected me to help them do it. By 15, I was working at a diner, not for pocket money, but to help pay for groceries and keep the lights on. College, only if I could pay for it myself. No FAFSA, no parental support. And I did. I clawed my way into a construction engineering program, took night classes, worked during the day, and learned how to stretch $1 until it begged for mercy. Meanwhile, my cousin Brandon, who moved in with us after his mom left, was living rent-free in the room across the hall, playing video games while I studied until my vision blurred. He was having a hard time. He was just a boy. He was family. That meant I couldn't resent him. I wasn't allowed to. But I did. I never got the praise. I got the pressure. When I landed my first real job with a construction management firm, I was making enough to afford a small 1-bedroom apartment in Tucson. I lived on canned soup and refused to get a car newer than 2012. I said no to weddings, dinners out, vacations. I said no to everything except my plan. The plan was simple. I would own a home before 30. And I did it. 3 years. 2 side hustles. 1 used truck. And dozens of 18-hour workdays later, I put down 20% on a modest but beautiful single-story house just outside Tucson. 3 bedrooms, hardwood floors, big backyard. It was dusty, worn, and perfect. I didn't tell anyone, not even my parents, until after the sale was final. I knew what would happen if I did. I knew what generosity looked like in my family. I'd get guilt-tripped into co-signing, giving, helping, and this time, I wasn't going to give anything away. So when I sent my family the picture of me standing in front of my house, keys in hand, their reactions weren't what you'd expect. There were no congratulations, just silence. Then my mom called. "Is that place safe for a single woman? That's a lot of space for just you." That was code for you don't deserve it. You don't need it. You should share it. And so when Brandon called a few months later, asking for a place to crash for just a few weeks, I knew it was a mistake to say yes, but I still did. Because some parts of me conditioned, carved, brainwashed, still believed that saying no made me the bad guy. Still thought if I didn't sacrifice, I wasn't enough. That's the part they counted on. The moment Brandon and Crystal moved in, I started losing pieces of my home. Small things at first, like my living room, which slowly transformed into Crystal's content studio for her wellness channel. She was an Instagram coach. That meant she spent her days drinking overpriced smoothies, filming manifestation routines, and uploading videos titled 5 Signs the Universe Wants You to Prosper. She started referring to my kitchen as our sacred space. I started referring to my sanity as rapidly vanishing. Brandon, as expected, didn't contribute a cent. Money's tight right now. He'd mumble from the couch he now claimed as his desk. I asked about his job search. It's tough out there. I asked if they were looking for a place. Still figuring it out. Weeks turned into months. My home, my sanctuary was slowly becoming theirs. My fridge stocked with food I didn't eat. My towels used and tossed across bathroom counters. My guest bedroom converted into a nursery vision board room, even though Crystal wasn't pregnant yet. But then, one night, I came home early from work and heard Crystal talking on speakerphone in the hallway. Her voice was soft, saccharine, dripping with manipulation. Honestly, babe, this is perfect. We just have to keep playing it cool. A little baby talk, some family energy, and that house is basically ours. My breath hitched, my pulse roared in my ears. I didn't move, didn't breathe. You think she'll go for it? Another voice asked. Crystal giggled. She's guilt-ridden and single. Of course she will. She's already let us stay this long. One ultrasound photo and boom, homeowners. They didn't just want to stay. They wanted to take, and they were going to use a fake baby to do it. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, mentally reviewing every favor, every manipulation, every conversation I'd dismissed as just being family. I saw it all now for what it was grooming. They had been preparing me for this moment. Crystal's social media posts about family vibes. Brandon's casual comments about a house like this being perfect for raising kids. My mother's phone call. All that space. Emily. For just one person. I was never supposed to have this house.
I was supposed to build it for them.
But something broke in me that night. Something fragile and ancient. The obedient daughter. The accommodating cousin. The silent mule that carried everyone else's baggage. I was done being the pack animal. I was going to become the storm. And they wouldn't see it coming. I didn't react the next morning. I woke up, made coffee, and went about my day like nothing had changed. Crystal and Brandon were in the kitchen. She was blending something green and unholy, while he scrolled through job listings he'd never apply to. Hey, Em, Crystal chirped. I was thinking, maybe we can repaint the guest room. Something more calming, baby-friendly. I smiled. Sure. Let me think about it. My voice didn't crack. My hands didn't shake. But inside, my brain was moving a mile a minute. I'd heard her plan. I'd seen the way Brandon looked at me. Like I was a stepping stone and not a person. They were building a narrative, and it didn't include me as the owner of this house. So I started building mine. Quietly, deliberately. The first thing I did was call Tasha, my best friend and a civil litigation attorney. She'd always told me, when people cross the line, document everything. So that's exactly what I began to do. I installed security cameras disguised as motion lights around the house. I started recording phone calls and interactions. I backed up copies of every home ownership document, tax record, and utility bill with my name on it. I created a digital folder labeled Sunshine and filled it with every receipt, every lease denial Brandon had ignored, every social post Crystal made from my living room calling it our home. Tasha didn't ask questions. She just said, "Start now. They're not squatting yet, but they're playing the long game. You need a paper trail before this turns into a lawsuit." The second thing I did was reach out to Ryan, my ex-boyfriend who now worked at the county recorder's office. We hadn't spoken in a year, and I wasn't thrilled to call him. But Ryan had always been honest. "Hey," I said after an awkward pause, "can you check if anyone submitted a title transfer request for my address?" There was silence on the other end. Then a slow, concerned exhale. "Why would anyone do that unless you were selling?" I didn't answer. Ryan said he'd look into it. No questions asked. The third thing I did was start talking to my neighbor, Miss Green, a retired elementary school teacher who lived alone and observed everything from her front porch. She had a photographic memory and a moral compass made of steel. When I told her what was going on carefully, without drama, she pursed her lips and said, "That blonde girl walks around here like she's queen of the block, always recording herself." I knew something was off. She agreed to keep an eye out. "Let me know if you need a witness," she added. Meanwhile, Crystal's plan was evolving. Subtle shifts turned into open declarations. She started referring to the house as our place in front of others. She decorated the living room with baby books, changed the Wi-Fi name to The Future Family, and printed out Pinterest boards titled Nursery Dreamland. I came home one night and found she'd started painting one of the bedrooms, a soft sage green neutral. "We figured we'd get a head start," Brandon said, avoiding my eyes. And then came the ultrasound photo, a blurry black and white printout taped to the fridge. Crystal beamed as she pointed to it. "Our little avocado." She giggled. I stared at it. "What's the due date?" I asked. She hesitated. Mid-August." Her voice cracked. "We'll confirm more at the next appointment." That night, I sent the photo to Deacon, a mutual acquaintance who had once dated Crystal's former best friend. He was blunt. "That's the same photo she used 2 years ago with a different guy. She just changed the name in Photoshop. Don't fall for it." Now I had proof she'd faked a pregnancy before. And that was when it became clear Crystal wasn't just manipulative, she was rehearsed. This was a routine, a performance, one she'd executed before. I wasn't her first target, but I would be her last. Then came the email. It was a forwarded PDF attachment titled Preliminary Deed Adjustment, and it was sent from Brandon's Gmail account to my parents. "Just a draft," he'd written. "But this will make things official soon." My mother replied with a heart emoji. My father wrote, "Proud of you, son. She doesn't need it anyway." That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the email, replaying every childhood moment when I had earned praise but never received it. Every moment Brandon had failed, and yet was celebrated. It had always been like this, my effort invisible, his potential exaggerated. And now they were trying to steal from me what I bled for because they believed they had the right. The next day, I filed an intent to sue notice through Tasha's office. She drafted a cease and desist letter and sent it to Brandon, Crystal, and my parents. But I didn't tell them right away. I wanted them to feel safe. I wanted them to think they were winning. So I played along. I bought decorations for the baby shower Crystal had planned. I let them invite 40 people into my home. I even helped cook. My hands trembled while making deviled eggs, but my face remained calm. I smiled when they posed for photos. I nodded when my mother announced she was so proud to hand over this home to the new generation. And then I saw it, the box on the table. Crystal opened it with exaggerated emotion. Inside was a fake deed, freshly printed, with Brandon's name on it and a forged signature that barely resembled mine. Everyone clapped. My mother cried. Brandon looked smug. Crystal kissed her fake belly. I excused myself, walked into my bedroom, and texted Tasha now. Then I pulled out my speaker, returned to the party, and hit play. Crystal's voice, clear as day, echoed through the living room. We just have to keep playing it cool. One ultrasound photo, and boom, homeowners. The room froze. I followed with, "This home was never yours." And the game. "It's over." Everyone stared. Crystal's face turned pale. Brandon mumbled something about a misunderstanding. But I kept going. "You forged documents. You falsified medical records. You lied to manipulate me. And you used my family to do it. But the cameras recorded everything. The email trails are archived. And this," I held up, "the cease and desist is your eviction notice." Gasps. Phones recording. My mother's mouth fell open. My father stood frozen. Crystal's hand shook. Brandon stepped forward. "Emily, don't do this. We're family." I looked at him, at all of them, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the mule. I was the one holding the reins. "Family doesn't steal. Family doesn't lie. You used me. And now, you pay the price." But that wasn't the end. That was only the beginning. Because what came next wasn't just about reclaiming my house. It was about reclaiming every part of me they tried to erase. The room was silent, except for the audio still echoing off the walls. Crystal's voice replayed like a curse I had finally broken. The energy shifted. People who had been clapping moments earlier now whispered among themselves, eyes darting between Crystal and me. One of her influencer friends started discreetly packing up her ring light. Another took her mimosa and backed away like Crystal's lies were contagious. Brandon looked dazed. My mother's hands trembled as she reached for the fake deed like it might vanish if she touched it too hard. My father's expression was unreadable, but I didn't care anymore. I wasn't scanning faces for approval. I wasn't hoping someone would stand up for me. I had already done that for myself. "I suggest everyone enjoy the refreshments you already paid for," I said, calm and deliberate. "But this party is over." Crystal opened her mouth to speak, something panicked and saccharine, but I raised a hand. "Anything you say now will be used against you. That wasn't just a party foul. That was criminal fraud. You forged a legal document, and you impersonated a pregnancy to gain property under false pretenses. That's a felony in Arizona. And I have it all recorded." She blinked rapidly, then turned to Brandon, who stood frozen. "Say something," she hissed. But he was too stunned to defend her. He wasn't just realizing that he'd been caught. He was realizing he'd never been in control at all. They didn't leave right away. There was too much shame in moving too fast. Crystal tried to recover her dignity by announcing that they were already planning to move anyway. But it landed flat. No one believed her anymore. The moment the audio had played, the narrative she'd curated for months crumbled. The sacred family space, the glowing mother-to-be facade, the future Mrs. Brandon Saunders brand, it all went up in flames. They left the next morning. I'd already changed the locks and had the sheriff's office on notice for trespassing. Tony, a close friend and ex-Marine who had helped me with the backyard renovation, showed up at dawn to supervise. He said he didn't want them sneaking out with anything that didn't belong to them. His presence made Brandon flinch. Crystal avoided eye contact with everyone. Watching them carry their things out of the house they tried to steal was almost anticlimactic, until I noticed Crystal leave behind the ultrasound photo. I picked it up with 2 fingers, like it was diseased, and dropped it into the trash. Then I lit a match. The fire crackled in the sink as the paper curled and blackened. A small act. Symbolic, but for me, it was everything. A release. A funeral for the lie that almost consumed my life. But the reckoning wasn't just emotional, it was legal, too. Tasha filed formal charges 2 days later. Fraudulent misrepresentation, forgery, attempted unlawful transfer of real property. The documentation was airtight text messages, audio clips, Instagram captions referring to our family home, and metadata from Crystal's laptop that showed she downloaded a blank deed template weeks prior. Crystal's influencer accounts began to bleed followers. Someone leaked the story to a local gossip blog that loved digging into online personalities. The headline read, "Instagram wellness coach accused of faking pregnancy to steal home from cousin's girlfriend." It wasn't even accurate, but it went viral anyway. Her sponsors dropped her within 48 hours. As for Brandon, he tried to salvage what he could. He texted me a half-hearted apology. "Didn't know she'd go that far. I just thought we'd start a family." I didn't respond. He didn't deserve one. My parents, however, were a different story. I hadn't spoken to them since the baby shower disaster. But then, 4 days after the legal notice was served, my mother showed up at my door. Alone. No announcement, no flowers, no apology. She stood there, shoulders hunched, arms folded like she was bracing for a storm. "Can we talk?" she asked. I didn't invite her in. I stepped outside and shut the door behind me. She started slow, said she didn't understand what was really happening, that Brandon had always been fragile, that Crystal seemed so nurturing, that I'd always been independent, so they assumed I didn't mind. And that's when I stopped her. Didn't mind what? Mom being erased, being used. Being told I don't need the one thing I've worked my entire adult life for. She looked down. It wasn't supposed to go that far. But it did. I snapped. "Because you let it, you co-signed their story. You chose them." Her lip quivered. "He's your cousin. And I'm your daughter." That landed for a second. Her eyes flickered with something like guilt. Then came the tears slow, practiced. I just wanted a family again. Things have been falling apart. And that was the core of it. Wasn't it not malice, not conspiracy, just weakness? She was scared of losing the illusion of a big, happy family and was willing to sacrifice me to preserve it. But I was done sacrificing. Until you acknowledge what you allowed and apologize, publicly. And in writing, "You're not welcome here," I said, pointing to the sidewalk. "This house is mine, my rules, and my boundary is non-negotiable." She left without another word. Tasha and I continued with the legal process. Crystal was offered a deal, pled guilty, pay fines, and agree to a public apology, no jail time if she complied. She took it, barely looking at the judge as she muttered her statement in court. Brandon didn't show up. But justice, I realized, didn't come with applause. There was no cinematic swell of music, no parade of people thanking me for standing up for myself. The real victory was quieter, colder. It was standing in my own house, alone, and finally knowing I was safe. In the weeks that followed, I cut financial ties to everyone. I had been paying my father's car insurance, my mother's phone bill, even covering my sister's rent during college. That stopped. I wrote them each a letter, not angry, just final. If you want support, earn it. If you want trust, rebuild it. But entitlement ends here. The blowback was immediate. My dad called, furious. Said I was abandoning my family. My sister posted a vague status on Facebook about selfish people who forget who raised them. I didn't respond, because for the first time in my life, I didn't need to defend my choices. I had already won, but part of me still ached, not for them, but for who I had been, the girl who believed family meant unconditional love, who believed hard work spoke for itself, who believed that if you just kept giving, eventually someone would say thank you. That girl was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her worth, who didn't beg to be understood, who didn't justify boundaries. Still, I wasn't bitter. I was rebuilding, and I knew exactly where to begin. The silence in my home after they left was deafening, but it wasn't empty. It was clean, unpolluted, like air after a storm, carrying the faint scent of ozone and soil and rebirth. For the first time in months, I walked barefoot through my living room without stepping on someone else's mess. No pastel pillows with Pinterest quotes. No strange herbal oils fogging up the hallway. No ring lights blinking like surveillance cameras. Just me, my walls, my breathing. But peace, I discovered, wasn't the absence of noise. It was the presence of clarity. And mine came with questions I could no longer avoid. Who was I without the pressure to give? What did I want without guilt wrapped around every decision? If I didn't exist to carry others, did I know how to stand for myself? The answers didn't come easily. I didn't wake up one morning glowing with self-love. I still checked my phone expecting a snarky comment, a text dripping in manipulation, a guilt trip disguised as concern. I still flinched when I saw photos of families smiling around dinner tables. I still felt, in some broken place inside me, like I had betrayed someone. That's what happens when your worth is built on how useful you are to others. The day you stop being useful, you mistake it for being bad. But healing isn't linear, it's layered. And I began layering slowly. The first layer was repairing the home itself physically, reclaiming what had been turned into a playground of deception. I repainted the bedroom Crystal tried to convert into a nursery. I stripped every wall of her cheap decals and replaced them with photos of hikes I'd taken, cities I'd visited alone. Each frame whispered, "You did this. You got here." I sold the furniture she'd brought in and donated the money to a local shelter for single mothers. The irony was satisfying. Then I tackled the kitchen. I scrubbed every surface she'd cleansed with intention. Not to undo her rituals, but to reclaim the space with mine. I organized drawers, replaced the fridge magnets with affirmations that actually meant something to me. Not love and light, no. Things like, "No" is a full sentence, or "silence is strength when well chosen." The second layer was more delicate, rebuilding my routines. When your life has revolved around other people's needs for so long, solitude feels foreign. So I began making intentional choices for no one but myself. I signed up for a boxing class, not because I wanted to fight, but because I wanted to learn how to hold my ground, physically and mentally. The trainer, Lena, was a woman in her 40s with forearms like carved marble and the patience of a therapist. Hit the bag like it lied to you, she told me once. I smiled for the first time in weeks after that. I started journaling, writing without editing, just vomiting my thoughts onto paper. Anger, shame, relief, pride. It all spilled out like black ink from a broken pen. I reread the entries days later and underlined the moments I sounded most alive. They usually started with, "I said no today." But perhaps the most unexpected part of reclaiming myself came from reconnecting with people who had seen me beyond my role in the family system. Tony, my contractor friend, began dropping by more often. At first, it was casual, fixing a squeaky door, checking on the security system, leaving me homemade protein bars because he made too many. But over time, our conversations deepened. He didn't offer pity. He offered perspective. "You didn't lose them," he said once while adjusting a porch light. "They were never really there to begin with. You just stopped pretending." And then there was Miss Green, my neighbor, who became a sort of accidental mentor. We started drinking tea on her porch once a week. She told me stories about her late husband, her years as a teacher, how she'd watched generations grow up and sometimes rot in this neighborhood. "You've got good bones, Emily," she told me one afternoon. "So does your house. You just had termites. Now you're rebuilding stronger." That stuck with me. But not everyone disappeared. Brandon resurfaced predictably, 3 months after the eviction. He emailed me a rambling message filled with half-hearted apologies, vague references to not knowing what Crystal was really like, and a subtle request for help finding a job. He said he'd hit rock bottom and was ready to turn things around. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I forwarded the email to Tasha, who read it and said simply, "He still thinks he's the protagonist." But I wasn't cruel. I responded a week later with firm, measured clarity. Brandon, I appreciate the apology, but healing requires more than words. If you want to rebuild trust, start with action. Get a job. Support yourself. Stay away from people who manipulate others. After 6 months of consistent accountability with proof, we can consider speaking again. Until then, I wish you well. He didn't reply. And that silence, too, was healing. Then came the moment I hadn't seen coming, my mother writing me a letter. Handwritten, 3 pages, no excuses, just confession. She admitted she'd known, deep down, that Crystal was manipulating the situation, that she'd been too afraid to lose the idea of togetherness, to confront the reality of abuse. She acknowledged how much I had given, how often I was overlooked. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She asked for permission to try again. It wasn't a magic fix, but it was the first real thing she'd given me in years. I didn't write back, not yet. Some wounds aren't stitched with words. They're stitched with time. But I placed the letter in a drawer, not to forget, but to remember that people can change, even if they're late. Meanwhile, I started something new. With the help of Tasha and Tony, I began working on a side project, a blog called Boundary Brick, where I wrote about the intersection of property, power, and personal identity, especially for women who've been taught to sacrifice their security for someone else's comfort. It started small, 10 readers, then 50, then 500, then a message from a woman in Chicago. I thought I was crazy for not letting my sister move in with me after she faked a medical emergency. Your story made me feel sane again. I kept writing, not because I was healed, but because I was healing. Because every word built another brick in the wall of the life I was constructing from scratch. One night, sitting on the porch with Min, Green, and Tony, I looked out at the street that had once felt like a battlefield. Now it felt like mine, not a war zone, a kingdom. This is the first time I feel like I'm living in my house, I said aloud. Tony nodded. That's because you finally stopped renting space in your head to other people. Ms. Green raised her teacup to ownership in every sense, and I clinked my glass against hers, knowing that no matter what came next this time, I wouldn't give away what I built. Not for love, not for guilt, not for blood. Because reclaiming your throne isn't just about kicking others out. It's about finally taking your seat at the table you built with your own hands. There's a strange calm that settles over you when you've reclaimed something you never should have lost, especially when that something was yourself, not just your house, your peace, your independence, but the version of you that used to whisper under the weight of other people's expectations, and who now speaks with clarity, because she finally understands she was never supposed to be silent in the first place. It had been 6 months since I played that audio in my living room and watched a fantasy unravel in front of family, friends, and strangers alike. 6 months since I stopped waiting for someone else to defend me, since I stopped negotiating with people who saw my life as negotiable, since I drew the line in permanent ink. And in those 6 months, life did not become perfect, but it did become mine. I'd love to tell you that justice cleaned up the mess and made everything neat, that my parents came crawling back with flowers and therapy bills, that Brandon moved on to an honest job and found humility, that Crystal vanished into obscurity and was never heard from again. But the truth is murkier. Crystal rebranded. Of course she did. She changed her username, dyed her hair a different shade of blonde, and started a new account with vague captions about lessons learned and rebirth. Her engagement was lower, her collaborations fewer, but she was still there selling spirituality like snake oil. Brandon, last I heard, moved to Nevada to stay with a college buddy. He tried to launch a dropshipping business. I don't know if it's still running. I didn't block him, but I muted him because silence is power when it's deliberate. My parents. The wound between us is healing, slowly, painfully. My mother wrote again, this time. She included a photograph of our old family home with the words, "I didn't protect you the way I should have. But I see you now." I haven't responded. Not because I'm angry, but because forgiveness is not a light switch. It's a door I will open when I'm ready. And readiness doesn't come on anyone's timeline, but mine. The thing people don't tell you about reclaiming your life is that there's grief attached to the victory. Grief for the person you used to be, for the family you thought you had, for the innocence that allowed you to believe everyone who smiles at you means well. I used to think of grief as a sign of weakness. Now I understand it's the soil where resilience grows. I kept working on Boundary Brick, and it grew organically. Honestly, I didn't chase followers. I chased connection. And what came back were women, hundreds of them, writing to say they, too, had been erased. In relationships, in families, in jobs. They spoke of gaslighting cloaked as love, of manipulation disguised as tradition, of being called selfish for daring to say mine out loud, and in their stories. I saw echoes of mine. Some asked me if I ever missed my family, if I regretted not working it out. And here's what I told them: I didn't burn the bridge. I just stopped patching it while they lit matches. That's not vengeance, that's boundaries. That's not hate, that's self-respect. There was one moment, quiet and small, that sticks with me. I was walking past the guest room, now converted into a small studio for my side design projects. And I paused at the door. The light was pouring in just right, catching on a framed photo on the shelf. It was me, taken by Tony, candid, laughing with paint on my hands, standing beside the newly repainted walls I'd once feared would become someone else's nursery. And I realized this was the life I almost surrendered because I thought being loved meant being needed. But love is not a debt. It is not a trade. It is not a transaction in which your peace is the price. It's choice. It's action. It's mutual. Or it's not love at all. That's the lesson. They didn't take my home. But they did take something first, my assumption that family equals safety. And when that illusion shattered, I had to build a new foundation, brick by brick, boundary by boundary. I no longer let guilt guide me. I no longer entertain manipulation dressed in concern. I no longer explain myself to people committed to misunderstanding me. And in that space, something extraordinary grew: clarity. Clarity that saying no doesn't make you mean. It makes you free. Clarity that choosing yourself doesn't make you selfish. It makes you sane. Clarity that sometimes you have to stand alone to realize no one's standing behind you anyway. They called me cold, entitled, ungrateful. But what they really meant was I stopped being useful. What I call it is becoming sovereign. So, if you're watching this, if your story sounds familiar, if you're the oldest daughter who never got to break down, the cousin who always got the short end, the friend who gives more than she receives, then this is for you. You don't owe anyone access to your life just because they shared a roof, a name, or a memory. You don't have to explain why you locked the door behind them. You don't need their permission to build a kingdom that no one can infiltrate. Because you were never meant to live in someone else's narrative. You were meant to write your own. And in mine, I'm not just the main character. I own the damn castle. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to draw a hard boundary or reclaim your peace, leave a comment. Share your experience. Let someone else know they're not alone. Subscribe for more real, raw stories about finding your voice, taking it back, and using it to build something unshakable. And remember, they only call it rebellion when you stop being convenient. I call it rising. See you in the next one.